Hey there, magical experimenters. You're probably wondering why I'm doing a video on a Sunday in the morning when normally I just do a video once a week. And normally I would wait to do this video, but I was asked a very interesting and really a tough but reasonable question about magic success and failure in response to my most recent video. And I thought, you know what? I want to give this person an answer. So I'm going to share the question that I was asked, and then I'm going to get into the answer. And for those of you who are joining me live, welcome, and please feel free to comment and ask questions. Right now, I'm going to share the question. So here's what the person said. He said, "Hi, Taylor. Thank you for your books and videos. I have a question which may read like it's a criticism of you, but that's not the attitude from which I'm posing it. Thank you very much, sir. Anyway, going on. You mentioned that your business has crashed and you are currently working in a call center. I got the impression that it is not the job you want to be doing. So when I come across someone such as you, who is a practiced magician and yet doesn't seem to be leading the life he wants to, at least in terms of his occupation and business success, I ask myself as a total magical newbie, why hasn't the magic you practice at least helped you achieve basic material success?" Again, this is not a criticism, it's a concern. What if I've put in years of efforts into learning and practicing magic and end up not having sorted the basics of my life out? Yours respectfully, and I'm not going to say the name of the person out of respect to him. So that's a really good question. And it's a tough question, but it's a reasonable one, so I'm going to answer it. I want to first off say that just because you practice magic does not mean your life will automatically be a success. One of the things that I have tried to be very transparent about in my own journey is my failures as well as my successes. And the reason for that is because I don't feel like I can authentically share with you how magic works if I don't also show you where I've made my mistakes. And that includes both in magical work and in my life. And at the same time, I also want to speak to the fact that sometimes success comes in the form of failure because of what failure teaches you. In fact, if you think about any person who is truly successful out there and you were to interview them and ask them, how did you become so successful? I guarantee you they will tell you about their failures and what they learned from those failures and how they used those failures to help them achieve success. Because the truth is, any person who's genuinely successful has failed a lot in life. Now, when I look back on my situation, my businesses crashed and burned. Why did they crash and burn? Because of me. I made some bad mistakes. At the time that my businesses went down, I was doing okay with them. I was making enough money that I could continue to be self-employed and contribute to my household and do the things that I wanted to do. But I was getting tired of the networking that I had to do, and I wanted to find a shortcut. Well, as anyone in life can tell you that's had any experience, when you try and find shortcuts, those shortcuts don't always work. You can try and cut corners, but it doesn't always work. And that's what really happened with me. I invested a ton of money in a bunch of online classes about online marketing, and then tried to implement what I learned, and it bombed. I mean, it just utterly bombed, both in terms of the magical business and the coaching business. And I had to make a really tough call. I had to decide, was I going to continue to rack up more debt and continue to try and force something into being successful, which some people have done, or am I going to go back to work and take care of my family? And at the time, I had to prioritize. So I made the very tough choice, and I decided to let my businesses go, and I went back to work. And I'll tell you, that was one of the hardest decisions of my life. The day I made that decision, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. I felt like a total failure, a total fuck up. Pardon my French. And it was a hard thing, because here I was, this person who, had been self-employed for 9 years. And it managed to be, I can tell you, anyone who's owned a business, who's been self-employed, will tell you it is really hard to get a business off the ground in the first couple of years. If you're still running at 9 years, you're doing something right. But they'll also tell you that a lot of businesses will still fail within the first 10 years. And that's what happened. I made some mistakes. I made some bad choices. And you might say, well, Taylor, what about the magic? I mean, you're a magical practitioner. Couldn't you just magic it all away? Well, no, magic doesn't work that way. And I had done some different magical work. Some of it had worked and some of it hadn't. I mean, I partially went down this path that I went on because of working with a spirit that ended up giving me some bad advice, and I followed that advice. Whose fault is that? Not the spirit. It's mine. So, I went back to work, and I spent the first 6 months at that job doing a lot of soul searching, asking myself, well, what am I going to do with my life? I don't want to do this. And, I was job hunting and everything else, but the only job I could find was a call center. I had experience as a technical writer, but I no longer had the right experience. And for those of you who are like, well, again, why couldn't you magic that up as a success? Magic is going to work off of what you have, what you can do. This is something that I find that a lot of people have a misunderstanding about magic. They think that magic will solve all their problems. That if I do magic, it'll just cure everything. No, it doesn't do that. And that's a hard thing for people to hear. They want a magic cure-all, and they don't realize that magic is actually a lot of hard work, and that you won't always be successful with your magic, just as you won't always be successful in your life, and that you're gonna have to sometimes learn the hard way. I ended up in this call center. I couldn't get a job as a technical writer, but I could get a job at the call center, and I decided that I had to make the best of that. And ironically enough, I found that it actually ended up being one of the best decisions staying at that call center, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So what I ended up doing is I spent those first 6 months soul searching, and I figured out, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, but I don't want to go back to coaching. I don't want to go back to trying to create classes and stuff because it's not speaking to me here. And I realized that the experience of my failure, taking those online marketing courses, trying to get these classes and everything else, was actually, within it lay a very valuable lesson. I was trying to do things that I genuinely didn't feel passionate about. So I took this failure and I started to ask myself, well, what do I feel passionate about? And I realized it was the writing. And I came to a very hard but a very important realization that I had gotten into my self-employed businesses back in 2008 when the everything crashed. I couldn't get a job as a technical writer then because nobody could get a job. If you were a contract worker, you weren't getting hired. And what I ended up doing is I went and I became self-employed, and I did it out of necessity. But as time went on and I became more successful, I asked myself, well, why did I continue doing this if I really didn't feel that passion? And part of it was because I wanted to get to a point where I could support my writing, that I could just do the writing and still have an income coming in. Because I had this sabotage in my head that you couldn't be successful as a writer. And it was a somewhat valid thing, because based on my experience with the publisher I was with, I wasn't making a lot of money from the royalties. I was getting 2 royalties a year. And if I was lucky, I was just barely breaking 4 figures with the royalties, even though my books were selling. And the reason why is because when you work with a publisher, publishers basically screw you out of a lot of money. I don't know how else to really put it. You end up paying a lot of money to middlemen, and so going with that model wasn't going to work. But an ex-friend, this was again another part of my failure. I ended up losing some friends through this process. I had changed in some ways, and one of my friends called me out on it, and I didn't handle it very well, and I ended up losing him as a friend. But one of the things he had pointed out to me was, well, you could make a living as a writer. And he pointed me out to a couple different books where people describe this business as a writing model. And I was like, nah, I don't know. I don't know if that can really happen. I thought that at the time. But then 6 months into this thing, into this soul searching, I'm realizing, this is what I really want to do with my life. So why don't I pick these books up? So I picked them up and I read them, and I learned about how you could become a successful indie author. And I thought, well, let's try what these guys say and take 2 of the courses that I developed for magical experiments and turned them into books. So I turned the Process of Magic course and Space-Time Magic Foundations into into two books. I turned them from courses into books, and I started selling them that way. And I found that they really took off. And I started seeing, and I saw that within the first couple months that I was actually making as much money from the sales of those two books as I was making from all the other sales of my other books. And I thought, man, this is insane. Why am I continuing to stick with this publisher? So I talked to my publisher and I told them I wanted the rights for my books back, and I took those rights back. And then I republished my books under my own imprint. And I'm still, quote unquote, paying a middleman, but I'm not paying as much, and I'm still getting more money. And I saw the results. And I did this about a year ago. Okay, so to kind of give us a timeline, back in November of 2017, I went back to work. And then from November 2017 to about May of 2018, I did a lot of soul searching. And then from May to basically August, I test drove what it would be like to see, test drove the indie writing process and published two books. And then I took my books back in October, and the rest of my books back, and I started self-publishing them. And then I started learning, I started taking all those online advertising, or all those online marketing courses that I had gone through, and where, it hadn't worked for the businesses that I had at the time. I took them, and I actually took a lot of that knowledge and started using it, because it turned out that it did work. It just worked when you actually, it worked when you actually have a bit of a budget at your disposal. And I did. I suddenly had some disposable income, i.e. the earnings from my books. So I started taking that and turning it around and throwing it into the covers and into the ads. And I started making even more money. And I also started writing more, because I realized that, you know what, this is going to work. And so this year I ended up writing, well, so far I've written 7 books. I'm working on an 8th. And 6 of those books are published, and at least the 7th will be published by the end of the year, possibly the 8th, we'll see. Most of those were magic books that I wrote about. And throughout the course of this, I kept reading about like indie author books on business success, and I really took the concepts and applied them to the writing that I'm doing. Which is, as a result, why some people are noticing, like, my writing has become a lot more sharper and focused, and it's shorter at the same time, like with the nonfic anyway. With the fiction, it's just taken off too. Now, you might hear all this and you might say, okay, Taylor, that's great, but you're not talking about magic in all of this. So where's the magic? I mean, it just sounds like you went and you took things and turned them around. But here's the thing. Throughout all of this process, I was also doing magical work toward really figuring out what I wanted to do and how I was going to free myself, because I didn't want to stay at this call center job. And at the same time, I also looked at the call center job, and I've tried to make the best out of it. So what I did is, I was a contractor initially, and I did everything I needed to do to hit the metrics to become a full-time employee, which meant a raise. And then what I did is I set up the environment so that I could get the work done and also work on my own stuff, because I actually, at work, I end up spending a fair amount of my time between calls just writing. And that's one of the reasons I'm able to get the writing turned around in the way that I am, because I'm basically putting every spare moment of time I have toward that writing in order to get the books out. And that's what you have to do sometimes. So I'm taking this situation, and what I've done is I've actually used some magic in my workplace to basically make people who might otherwise be interested in what I'm doing ignore what I'm doing and just let me do what I'm doing. As long as I'm doing my job, they ignore me and I get to do what I'm doing. And part of that is because I've set up some magical work toward that end, and I've talked about that and written about it before. So that's one way that that magic has really shown me, has kind of helped to expedite my freedom. The other way that magic is really helping me to expedite my freedom from this job is that, as I said, I've been doing this work from the very beginning. when I realized I was going to go back to work, I realized I needed to also change some approaches to my magical work. I had been approaching my magical work from a place of, I need to get these results. I need to get things turned around fast. I need to do shortcuts. It wasn't working. It had failed with the online courses. It was failing with my magic. So what I did is I decided to take a long-term approach. I took a long-term magical working developed by my mentor called the Sphere of Art, and I started doing it daily. I memorized the chants. Then I started doing the chants daily. Then I started adding in other components, and eventually I ended up modifying the magical working. And I'm actually writing about that in the current book on magic that I'm writing. How to design magic by design is what the book's going to be called. So anyway, I went and I used this magical working every day to fuel my creativity, to inspire me, and really to, at the same time, provide me the resources I needed to get where I needed to go. And that was part of what inspired my approach toward writing at work, because one day I suddenly had this idea: I can write at work. I can do it between calls. I'm just sitting here staring at a monitor. Why should I be staring at that when I could be doing something productive with my time? And so I did it. And then I started, and at the same time, I used this creativity work to inspire me. As I was working with the element of creativity, and as I was applying the sphere of artwork to this work, I started having lucid dreams where I would come up with these great plot ideas for my fiction books. And as a result, I have like about, I don't know, 15 different plots to write for just the fiction alone. And on the magic side of things, I ended up coming up with about, I would say, about 20 to 30 books to write as of right now that I could write. And this is all based off of my experiences and knowledge and everything else. And of course, in the meantime, I'm continuing to practice magic every single day, continuing to do this work. And I'm not doing it necessarily with the explicit desire of becoming free of the job. I'm doing it with the explicit desire of truly following my passion and trusting in what I'm doing, and letting the journey itself carry me to where I go. But what I'm seeing is I'm seeing these results. And then what I added into it is I started adding in some wealth magic workings. I wanted my advertisements to take off so I could get more book sales. So I did some work with a couple of pentacles from my friend Allison Tchaikovsky. I also developed a couple of unique elemental wealth magic workings of my own. Again, I've written about this on my blog, so you can go check them out there if you want to learn more. And what ended up happening is this also helped to expedite the process of my freedom, because I have, in the last couple months in particular, this last month and this month, it's going the same way, as I've made 4 figures off of my book sales. So I've discovered that, yes, you really can make a living off of your writing. It takes a fair amount of work. And I will say, for anyone who's listening to this and watching this, you must keep in mind that I already had a back stable of books, and that I took that, and that's part of what helped this process. So I'm working with magic to expedite this process of freedom. Again, someone might say, well, that's great, but Taylor, why can't you just magic yourself to freedom right now? Why can't you just snap your fingers? Well, that's Hollywood magic, folks. It doesn't work that way. Okay, I mean, there are occasions where you can do a magical working and something will happen just like that. And I've had that happen to me before, but does it happen all the time? Not really. And I'm always going to be brutally honest about that. I've said that before in these videos. I've said it before in my writing, and I'll say it again, no doubt. And the reason why I'm always going to be honest with you about my failures and successes and where magic fits into all of that is because I have no problem being transparent with you and showing you the journey. Not everyone else will do that with you. I can tell you that because, I mean, look at how many authors write books about magic. Do they really share their failures? Do they even speak to that at all? And the answer is no. I don't see it. You want to see how someone becomes successful? Have them share their failures with you. Have them share what they learned from their failures. In my case, I failed big time, and I had to go work at a job I didn't want to work at. And that wasn't a failing of the magic. That was a failing on my part. I made some bad choices. But what I did is I adjusted and adapted. And here I am 2 years later, well on my way to becoming financially independent again. Self-employed again, full-time self-employed again. Am I still working at the job I am? Yes. But I can guarantee that's not going to be much longer just because of the way things are turning around. And part of that is the magical work. And part of it is also the business plan that I've put together, my marketing, the marketing work and the online advertising and all the other things that I'm doing to make this possible. And as I've always said about magical work, when you do magical work, you have to factor in the mundane as well as the magical. So like I'm factoring in the mundane work and I'm applying it to the magical work and marrying them together in order to get the results I want. Magic can help you achieve basic material success. But here's the thing you have to realize too. It is not a cure-all. It is something you will still have to do your own part of. Magic is just one part of the tool set that you can use to help you get there. Now, in the end, the person asked the question, am I going to be wasting my time if I spend years and years practicing magic, especially if, I want to achieve a basic level of material success? And my answer to that is if you want to achieve a basic level of material success, don't rely upon magic alone. You have to be willing to learn certain fundamental skills that you may not want to, but it's important. Here's a feeling I see in occultism in general, and really in truth in people in general. People get tunnel visioned. They focus on just one thing. So I see a lot of occultists that are really good at magic and the occult, but really have no real practical idea of how to live in the world around them. Harsh truth there. They can't manage their money and everything else. Is that because the magic should somehow fix their lives? Well, here's the answer to that. Magic isn't going to fix your life for you. Magic can help you with things. It can help you make your life easier. It can help you have experiences and all that other stuff. But you also have to learn other skills. I started learning about money back in 2006, 2007, because I realized I didn't know a lot about it. Now, part of that happened because I ended up doing a elemental magical working with the element of earth. Part of my elemental balancing work that I do, where I work with an element for a year and use that to help me figure out the areas of my life that need to be balanced. Well, that was one of the areas of my life that needed to be balanced. I started learning about the basics of financial management. I already actually knew how to manage my money pretty well, but I learned a lot more about it. I started learning about, investing in stocks and things like that. I started learning about running a small business and all those things. And in the years since, I've had lots of experiences. Again, some where I have failed, some where I've had success. But I can guarantee that the failures inform the success. The failures are the soil that fuel the success. So you learn those skills, and as you learn those skills and you apply magic to what you learn, it can change your life. It can help you achieve that basic material success, but don't rely upon magic alone. Open some books up about finances. If you want to run a business, open some books up about running a business. Go to some classes, watch Shark Tank and The Profit and Small Business Revolution. Learn what other people have done and learn from their failures and successes, and be willing to make your own failures and successes. And just remember that if you practice magic, magic alone will not guarantee success. Magic can help you make the path a bit easier. But sometimes you're going to have experiences regardless. You're going to fail regardless, and that's where you have to pick yourself up and keep going. What tells me that magic works in my life is the fact that, 2 years into, not even 2 years into working at this company that I'm working at, I'm already well on my way to finding my way out and ensuring that I will never go back to work. And part of that success, I might add, isn't just my success, it's my family's success, because I helped my wife create a career entity years and years ago when she and I first got together. And every few years, that entity has basically helped her get a promotion and, helped her go up. Her rise in her particular field has been unprecedented. Like, She came into a place where people didn't really even know her, and in the last 10 years she's done amazing. And part of that's because of her, obviously, and part of it's because of the magical entity that was created to help her expedite that process. And it's to the point where she's also basically going to be able to replace the income that I'm making with the raise that she's gotten. And that's because of the magical work. But you see, magic is a long-term process. And the problem is that most people write about it from a short-term process, right? Do a spell and get a result. Well, hey, that works. But let me tell you, you have not even begun to tap into how magic really works if you're only focused on that. You have to play this as a long-term game. And most people will not. Most people lack the patience and discipline to play a long-term game with their own life. But I've never had that problem. I can be a bit impulsive, but I'm also someone who's very good at calculating the odds and taking calculated risks and doing what I've got to do to get where I want to go. And that's why I'm going to be free sooner than later. And having spoken to some people who have gone down that route of failing and going back to work and then eventually getting their freedom back, I can tell you, it usually takes a lot longer than just 2 years. So magic has definitely played a role in it. And that is, in and of itself, an amazing experience. But again, don't look at magic as your only solution. Expand your horizons, learn other disciplines, figure out what you really want to do. This is why I share these things, and it's why I'm so honest about it. I mean, you can watch these videos and read my books and say, well, if nothing else, at least Taylor's honest about where he's messed up and made mistakes and what he's had to do to get back to where he's at or to climb higher. You will make mistakes in your life. Magic will not solve all your problems. And if you understand that and can accept that, then you can actually use magic effectively to make changes in your life. You just have to recognize that sometimes you're still going to fall. And if you embrace failure and learn from it, you will succeed ultimately in the end. And yes, I'll be writing a book about that too. I actually have something called The Alchemy of Failure that I started a couple years ago and then put away because I realized it wasn't the time to write it. But it's definitely going to be something I'm going to write in the next couple years because I'm going to show this process of how I got my freedom. But I wanted to speak to that question. Hopefully I've answered it. And regardless, I just want all of you to know that it is possible to get the life that you want. And magic can help you with that. But you have to remember at the end of the day, it's still you who has to take responsibility for that life. You have to be willing to do the work. And some of that's going to be magical work and some of it's going to be mundane work. But if you're focused on what matters to you and you get rid of the distractions, you can accomplish anything. You just have to stay focused. All right. That's it for today. Wanted to create this video for you guys and hopefully you enjoy it, and take care and have a good one. And feel free to leave comments, ask questions, and all that other fun stuff. See you on Thursday.